Salutations from space, everyone. This is Gemini Brett of More Than Astrology. Presenting from home in Seattle, though my home is like extremely empty at this point. I am in the process of moving back to California. So today is July 26th, 2018, at least where I am. It's the day of Sun opposite Mars, the halfway point of the Mars synodic cycle. We'll probably speak about that some because the topic today is triple eclipse. And this portal that we're in right now, which is a partial solar eclipse in tropical Cancer and a total lunar eclipse in Aquarius and a partial solar eclipse in Cancer. Sorry, Leo. So why can triple eclipses happen? What are they about? Is it anything special beyond just a normal eclipse season? Is it extended? How long do they last? These are some of the questions I've been asking myself recently. And then also just kind of in a study of, well, how can I open space in my own life for that eclipse energy to come and provide a shift and bring some light out of the shadow and whatnot. And the third of the triple eclipse is in my fourth house, my house of home and family and roots. And I am eclipsing my house and moving back to California. So everyone on this call currently knows that Mercury stationed retrograde recently, and he did so also in my fourth house. So there's something about moving back to California, and was interested to contemplate and find that the last time I moved back to California was 18 years ago. So the Saros cycle of when this triple eclipse family was last around. And I think it's really powerful in astrology for us to look to the house where these cosmological or astronomical events like an eclipse are going to happen, and open some space in that place for them to give the gift of their energy. And it's kitschy, but one of my mantras usually in the astrological practice is choose change before change chooses you. So I'm in this process of clearing out my house and getting ready for this move, but also, and you really want to sell a house in a triple eclipse season with Mercury retrograde and Mars retrograde and all these things that are happening right now, right? It's not necessarily the best electionals for this kind of thing. It depends on our own, I guess, contemplations and cosmology. So I'm also at this place where I'm not sure if I'm meant to wait, and getting ready has slowed itself down, and who knows. But anyway, I'm not usually sitting where I do over there with all my toys and stuff because they have been driven in a U-Haul truck down to California, and there's very little left here. Given that I've been so nuts and all over the place with this move, I haven't taken hours and actually days and days, as I usually do for these Zoom video or Zoom meetings, to prepare a ton of slides. And this thing is less mapped out than they usually are for me. And so we'll see where the flow takes us. Let's start with some charts. So I will open up Astro Gold software. Here's the Sun-Mars opposition that's happening in about 5 hours. So Sun, 4 degrees, 8 minutes Leo, so close to the North Lunar node, and Mars here opposite, right? And this means Mars is in the very middle of his 2-month retrograde, and in a sense, in the middle of his synodic cycle, depending on how you work with the Mars synod. I think it's something that we'll look at today because the total lunar eclipse tomorrow is very strongly aligned to Mars. Let me bring that chart up. Right, here's tomorrow's total lunar eclipse, tropical Aquarius. And you know what, let me do another thing. We'll turn these into 0 Aries chart wheels. Okay. So tropical Aquarius, 4 degrees, 44 minutes in this ephemeris, which I love. And of course, the sun on the opposite side. Total lunar eclipse means full moon, means this moon-sun opposition, right? 444 Leo. And we can see how close Mars is. And we see that Mars is retrograde. And I hope if we all take a minute to contemplate this, we'll know that a full moon conjoined and a planet will always mean that planet is retrograde. So let's sit in that for a second. And can a full moon ever be conjoined Mercury or Venus? The answer to the latter is no. And can you see why the cycles and where the planets are in respect to Earth in the chart, right? So this is something we want to learn to do, and something I think we'll play with some astronomy software to look at today. And see, you know, in this two-dimensional representation of a very three-dimensional thing of the heavens that we have in our astrological charts, it basically looks like the moon is right on top of Mars. And we'll also, I think, see why that's not at all the case. But I want to bring in a few other charts. Let me bring them up quickly. Okay. Right. So here's a tri-wheel with all three of the eclipses of this triple eclipse season that we're currently in. In the very inner wheel, and these are West Coast time, Seattle, Washington, where I live, 0 Aries wheels, right? So we have a whole sign chart with Aries at the horizon. The first of the triple eclipse is a partial solar eclipse, the 21st degree of Cancer, very strongly opposed to Pluto and on Pluto's nodes, which is another thing we'll look at. The middle wheel here is the second of these 3 eclipses, tomorrow's total lunar eclipse, July 27th, 2018. Here in Seattle, we're on the opposite side of the Earth from where this will be most visible. Many of you live where you can see this total lunar eclipse, and I'll help you go check it out. And then the third eclipse of the season, this outer wheel, is 19th degree of Leo, very strongly aligned by quincunx to Pluto, and kind of a soft yod with Neptune and Pluto. I wouldn't really consider that to be tight enough orbs, but look at some of the things that have happened from this inner wheel to the outer wheel. So Uranus is stationed retrograde. This happens in early August. Mercury is stationed retrograde. That happened on July 26th, 25th, depending on where you are. And Jupiter, who stationed direct shortly before the first eclipse of these series, is now moving along. He's kind of been hanging out there in 13 and change Scorpio for some time. So we'll look at all of those planets, but I really want to look at Mars. But first, before we do any of that, I think it's important anytime we're playing with eclipses. Let me open another software that's a little easier to manipulate in some ways. This is the total lunar eclipse here in Intrepid Astrology software. And the chart is cast for Giza in Egypt, Great Pyramid style, because that's one of the places on Earth where Aries is rising at the time, specifically in Giza, the 17th degree of Aries. But I can get this software which does not offer me a 0 Aries or a natural chart wheel. I can convince it to look that way by finding a place on Earth where Aries is rising and casting a whole sign chart, which is really the only reason why this is cast in Giza. But I think anytime we talk eclipses, we should really get into the 3 parts of the philosophy. Earth, moon, and sun. Because this is what's happening in an eclipse, right? An eclipse, we know, solar eclipse is a special kind of new moon. Lunar eclipse is a special kind of full moon. And we know they're special because these align near the lunar nodes, which from Earth's point of view are where the paths of moon and sun intersect. But what is all of that, you know? And I personally feel we should all have a different answer to that question. What is the Earth? What is the moon? What is the sun? But I think anytime we're exploring astrology, we want to ask these questions that can seem so basic. But I mean, how many different suggestions of what the sun represents astrologically are there? And in a sense, there should be an infinite amount. I mean, or at least as many as there are us. So, but what does the sun mean to you? What does the moon mean to you? What does a new moon mean to you? What does a full moon mean to you? And do we often enough consider Earth, right? We are earthlings, primarily concerned with the experiences here on our planet. don't have a hard time calling it the most important planet to us, the planet we chose, or perhaps she knows us. Chose us. I don't really know how that thing works, right? But Earth, where we can have this experience of healing and feeling and knowing and growing. And where is Earth in the chart wheel? So many softwares will allow us to draw in the Earth glyph, and it will always be exactly opposite the sun. And that's true in some philosophies and in some cosmologies. It's also very not true. I mean, that's as if you were looking at the Earth from the sun, basically. And the Earth in our chart is the center, right? The Earth really is the chart. It's the cross of matter inside the circle of spirit, as we say. And there's these three parts of the philosophy of which our glyphs are composed, and they are what? The circle of spirit, the crescent of soul, and the cross of matter. You know, in many books, I've read that, and I've been taught that directly by different teachers. And I say, you know, why? Why is the circle spirit? And so I've spent a lot of time studying with the compass and the square. And most of my students could tell you that when they first come over for lesson number 1, they're not charged. In fact, I spend some money because I give them a drawing compass and I invite them to go draw 108 circles and then come back around if they really want to continue the study. Because the idea is we want to take the circle back and connect to what is this image that used to represent the one. Make one there, right? And this image that we use to represent the sun, right? The circumpunct with that strange dot in the middle. So I want to read to you from Hermes' Emerald Tablets. And this is most of what I'll read is from Isaac Newton's translation. From what science class teaches us about Newton, you wouldn't think that he was a great alchemist. And I imagine an astrologer, though that's not really known. But he spent many of his formative years in the home of an apothecary. And I imagine this is where Newton probably became a student of Hermes. He was at least interested enough to create his own translation of this ancient text, the Emerald Tablets of Hermes. I think as in astrology, we quote from the tablets often. We say, as above, so below, right? And this is where that comes from. And this is not how it's said in Newton's translation. The tablets start like this. "'Tis true without lying, certain and most true. That which is below is like that which is above. And that which is above is like that which is below, to accomplish the miracles of one only thing." I love that because not only does he say as above, so below, he says as below, so above. What does that mean, right? Enjoy that seed. Please take that and let it sprout somewhere. And I will say, for me, this means that not only are we audience members of the Celestial Symphony, we have instruments in our hands and we can jam. So to accomplish the miracles of one only thing, what is one only thing? What is he talking about? What are the Hermeticists, the alchemists talking about when they say the one thing, the one mind? This is something you'll hear often if you engage with these ancient texts and beautiful images that were left with these mysteries. Well, I'll just say the last line of the tablets in Newton's translation is, "That which I have said of the operation of the sun is accomplished and ended." And we get through the tablets and we basically realize that he's calling the sun the one in many ways. What is that, right? What is the one in general? So, I mean, for me, in my own connection to this, in the end, just before he says that, what I said of the operation of sun, he says, "Hence I am called Hermes Trismegistus, having the three parts of the philosophy of the whole world. That which I have said of the operation of the sun is accomplished and ended." So what are these three parts of the philosophy? And I think in the geometry and the way that they've come into our tradition, and nobody really knows when these planet glyphs first came through. But the way that they've come down to us and the way that we draw at least the traditional visible lights with these three elements of the circle, which we call spirit, and the crescent, which we call soul, and the cross of matter, it feels to me that these at least represent the three parts of the philosophy. And that therefore the three parts of the philosophy are matter, soul, and spirit. So in a sense, very subjective terms. Maybe that's not true so much for matter. And it should be the least subjective probably for matter, right? The things we can touch and hold. And that includes the monkey suit, right? What is this game of embodiment and incarnation? What are we here to do on Earth? And Earth we draw with that cross of matter inside the circle of spirit. The circle of spirit, which shows up on our charts, it is the zodiac, right? I mean, this is the place where sun lives. The zodiac defined by the ecliptic plane, the Earth-Sun relationship, which I will suggest is this relationship of matter and spirit. And so I feel that sun, at least in our local zone, is what the Hermeticists could refer to as the one, or it's our local representative of the one thing that always was, is, and will be, the indivisible, the indifferentiable, right? The idea of unity is it cannot experience itself, it is everything. And so many of the teachers in strange spiritual circles will talk to us about how the circle or how spirit divided itself into these gazillion pieces so that it could experience itself. One of my favorite teachers I probably won't meet was Alan Watts. And Watts, who brought much of the Eastern philosophy to the Western mind in the 60s and 70s. He talked about this. He talked about how the one thing divides itself into these gazillion pieces, which are you and me and that squirrel and whatever, right? So that spirit can experience itself, so that it can witness itself, because the one just by default cannot do this. So why would we draw the one like this circle of spirit, right? I learned one like that, and that's 2 and 3, right? And I learned that this is 0. Well, the circle is much older than the 0, much. The 0 is kind of a new concept, you may know. And it's amazing because before the 0 came round, we began with 1. And this is a very simple thing, but so simple that it's the most complex thing happening. Imagine if we started our numbers with 1 instead of with 0. How does that shift consciousness in and of itself? You begin with 1, the unity. And we're talking about unity consciousness. And I'm not saying that was going down in 500 AD before the circle came to town. But philosophically, this is a very real thing. And when the 0 comes to town and you put the 0 in front of the 1 and suddenly we start with nothing. What an amazing shift. So these calendars we use, these words, these languages, these numbers, they're all incredibly relevant to the way that we build our experience of our world. They're very much at the root of the definitions of our consciousness, or the structures through which we create reality. And so I think there are things that we should really explore and play with. And I think by very nature, we astrologers are doing this by engaging with symbols and seeing that they are so much more in cycles, and knowing that there's more than coincidence happening here. So you put 0 at the beginning of the line, and now you need to balance 3 with -3. Right? So not only are you starting with nothing, you're actually starting in debt. We go back to negative infinity and the number lines that we learned eventually, right? What if 1 is the beginning of this thing? How do you balance 3? What is the opposite of 3 with 1 in the middle of something? And the answer is 1/3, right? When we say -3 plus 3 is 0 to get to that middle, of nothingness, or 1/3 times 3 is 1 to get to that middle of oneness. So I really love to say that products multiplication is more productive than sums. Anyway, that rant provided by the strange contemplations of a circle. And this is what I do, is I'll draw a circle and I will just stare at it until I wake up later and see a puddle of my own drool encompassed by that circle, as I've like tripped into this strange thing that I never got a chance to do, because when I was taught circle, I was taught circle, square, triangle, rectangle. Here's all your shapes, right? We weren't ever taught to just do this. And later we learned things. We learned formulas. What is the circumference of the circle? Does anyone remember? Right? So pi times the diameter, or 2 pi times the radius, right? Well, this brings us to the difference between curves and lines. And this is what we play with the compass and the square. The compass, which draw curves, and the square, which draws lines. The rule, it's called. But one of the rules of the geometry tradition is we're not allowed to measure things. It's all just taking circles and lines, and it's so that you can create all that is just through this. And I just love to say that we all have our line side and we all have our curve side. In the tradition, they're spoken as the line is masculine and the curve is feminine, which is wonderful, because the symbol that we use for the sun, which so many people teach as masculine, would therefore be all feminine. You get 2 of these things on the scene, and what's it look like, you know? But there's a hidden line here. Can you see it? And it's easier to find when you create this from the beginning. Because when we create this, we start from source. We start at the center. And we ray out with the compass, just like the rays of the sun. So there's this line here that we use when we open the compass, then to sweep this circle through infinity, you see. And that's an amazing thing when you draw with a compass. I mean, philosophically, because technically your lead's getting shorter and all that, but philosophically, you could go forever and ever 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 in every direction, both directions. Every point on the circumference of the circle is the same distance from the center. Really, this is a 2-dimensional form that represents 3 dimensions of a sphere. In sphere, the rumor is the Pythagoreans called the goddess, or the heavenly form, or the form of great mystery itself. And the circle is very mysterious. So this is the thing about lines and curves. You can measure lines, you can't really measure curves. So if I ask you the circumference of the circle and I tell you that the radius is 2, we can use our formula and say 2 pi r, 2 pi times 2, and that's 4 pi, there you go. Well, okay, well, we've calculated pi now to over 1 billion digits with no repetition and no end in sight. And in mathematics, they call this irrational, which I feel is a very patriarchal expression, because in a sense, we're trying to define the curves in our own, I think, fear of something that we can't understand as irrational, where really a more beautiful and truthful, I feel, expression would be mysterious, right? And the curves speak about our dream side. So an example I love, like I drove a U-Haul truck to San Francisco from Seattle and moving down to the Bay, and you know, you can take the straight road and the line says, obviously, the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line, right? But that is true if the whole point of the thing is, in this case, going to San Francisco. But what if the point is going to San Francisco? What if it's more about the journey than the destination? And sometimes time and life allows for this, and we're inspired to let it flow and see where that road goes, and bring a sleeping bag and know we'll meet some friends and we don't know who they will be yet, and just live more in that dream. And this is the way of the curve, which on this drive would say, take the coast. All right, so why all of this? Because it's really held in the mysteries of circle, which is what we use to represent sun. And we know we have the circle and the glyph for earth, the cross of matter inside the circle of spirit. We know we have the circle in Venus, spirit over matter, or Mars. And you probably know the old glyph for Mars didn't have that phallus or that spear, or whatever that thing is, that symbol for iron, but was the cross of matter above the circle of spirit. And I really love that because we see it's the polarity to Venus. And just as Venus, at least in her orbital path, is between us in the light of the sun, and Mars is exterior to Earth, right? At least in their paths. I love to think of Venus as spirit over matter as the great essence of the inhale. That role is to bring spirit down into this world of matter. And then when balanced on the other side, we breathe it out. The exhale is Mars. And Mars is, I think, taken very far out of balance, even with this symbolic suggestion that he's meant to only be what the alchemist drew as iron. Because Mars, with that arrow, breaks our rules of the traditional glyphs are created with the circle and the crescent and the cross. Right? So how do we make the crescent of soul? And Hermes tells us. He says that which is below is like that which is above, and that which is above is like that which is below, to accomplish the miracles of one only thing. And as all things have been, and arose from the one by the mediation of one, so all things have their birth in this one thing by adaptation. And I love this. Because the Alan Watts, and he's certainly not the first or the last to suggest this idea that the one thing divides itself into a gazillion pieces to experience itself. Well, for me, and I think for Hermes, one of the very definitions of the one is that it cannot divide itself. So then how do we have an individuated experience? And I think in geometry terms, we would say it transforms itself or it reflects itself. And you learn when you're drawing that if you want to make a crescent, you start with a circle and then you just move your compass a little bit and you end up sweeping it again and you get a crescent, right? You get these two or not two. And you can take this so far that it gets like way too much body to represent a crescent or the moon, but one of the places we go is the Vesica Piscis, right? The mandorla, the sacred almond of these two circles that intersect in that beautiful gateway, which geometry teaches is the source of all creation. Don't have the flashcards I usually do here, and I might have even shown them to the group before, but we have to create that image if we want to find our way to create the cross, to create matter. And I think what we're seeing here, and I believe it's one of the many, many ways that we can translate Hermes Emerald Tablets, which have perhaps an infinite amount of possibilities in their alchemical gift, is that matter itself. Well, there's a couple ways I can go to this. I can say that matter is created from the witness of spirit and soul, or I can say that there is no spirit or soul without matter. So, all right, subjective again. Spirit being the one thing, the indivisible. And I feel that this is represented by sun. That sun itself is great mystery. Now, the sun knows it's a star and knows there are other stars. But it's much more than just some nuclear fission fusion reactor that science class told me it is for us here. It is the giver of light and life. And sun sign astrology, you know, which really isn't even older than the zero, but once the heliocentric nature of our solar system became our cosmology, it made sense for us to really lean towards the sun. In some ways, how could we never not be of that consciousness? Because the sun gives us light and gives us life, and that much is undeniable. The sun, in so many senses, also great mystery, because you know, this is the one of the lights that we cannot stare at without going blind or getting burned. It's very hard to define how big the sun is. I mean, I draw these things all the time. We're building stone circles in a few different communities up here, and it's like, let's align this to the solstice sunset. It's like, well, is it there or there? It's very hard to see. If I watch Jupiter set, it's like right there, you know. Even the moon, because I can gaze at the moon all night, it's much easier to see the center of the moon's body with the sun. It's a tricky thing. You've probably experienced that. I feel that the sun holds the codes of every being of our solar system. Earth would hold the codes of all of us, and all these squirrels and the stellar jay I just heard out there, and all of these roses, which are still alive in some regard, and the entirety of the rose beam and the iris and everything, you know, is Earth. And so that when I engage with Jupiter, as I often do in the sky, then I'm also experiencing all Jupiterians. When I engage with Vega, a beautiful star that always calls to me, I'm also experiencing every being around on every planet and moon around Vega. And when they look at our star, they are experiencing you and me and maybe all the beings that ever have been and will be too, but certainly that are here now. And that Earth holds the codes of all of us, and that sun holds the codes of all of us, and all of the Mercurians and Venusians too. So I feel that sun in so many ways is the local representation of the all, the one thing. And that really it is a source of that unity consciousness. So it's fascinating too that we look at sun at least in these 12 different ways: Aries, Taurus, Gemini, etc. Just as there are 12 keys in the Pythagorean tuning of a musical octave, which is a very truthfully beautiful geometric, musical, mathematical thing. There are 12 keys in the octave called astrology, right? So I like to see sun as spirit, as the one thing. And the truth is, it's much easier for me to even experience the sun in the reflection of a moon, and especially a full moon, which rises at sunset. Or see sun reflected in Mars. Some of you have probably, especially in the southern hemisphere, have really been seeing Mars lately, and it is amazing, bright, beaming. I've had clients who I was like, hey, go check out Mars. He's aligned really strongly to this planet for you. Just go have a look. And they'll call me back. It's like, it was too much. I couldn't even deal. It's like, oh, right. That's why they call Mars Mars. You might want to go to Saturn first and kind of ground in and then go there. But I can really, especially when I'm contemplating these planets, it's healthy, I think, to understand that they are certainly alive and they have their own happening, but that the light that I'm experiencing is the way that they reflect sunlight. And yet, for me, and people who know that come for sessions around here, I'm very much a moon astrologer. I'm very focused on the moon. And I will argue, and this is weird, but I will argue that if the moon wasn't here, we would be like hive mind. We would be like the ants or the bees. Because I think the moon's role, and I believe Hermes tells us here, is to reflect that one thing represented by the sun into an absolutely unique individual expression here in matter on Earth, so that we can have a unique experience as a unique soul. And I believe this is the incarnational function of the moon, which is tied to the other necessary side, which is called the art of forgetting. So that if we remembered what we truly were, we wouldn't come here to be a Brett or to be a Linda or Sue, to do our thing and to be you. So we can have our own individual experience of healing, and feeling, and knowing, and growing, should we choose to, or probably even if we don't. And that feeds back to the one thing. So a long wrap there where I could have just said sun is spirit and moon is soul and earth is matter. but hopefully that journey around the forest will help us into the path through the trees, and we can understand what we're seeing in the roots and the patterns of the bark there as I continue more than would be so had I not taken that journey. I want to continue with the emerald tablets of Hermes. So, 'tis true without lying, certain and most true, that which is below is like that which is above, and that which is above is like that which is below, to accomplish the miracles of one only thing. And as all things have been, and arose from one by the mediation of one, so all things have their birth in this one thing by adaptation. The sun is its father, the moon its mother, the wind hath carried it in its belly, the earth its nurse. Separate thou the earth from the fire, the subtle from the gross, sweetly and with great ingenuity. It ascends from the earth to the heaven, and again it descends to the earth, receiving the force of things superior and inferior. I skipped a line, which is like to me the most important line, which I was going for here. So he says, the sun is its father, the moon its mother, the wind hath carried it in its belly, the earth its nurse. And he says, the father of all perfection of the whole world is here. Its force is entire if converted to earth. So what does that mean? Now, very likely these are alchemical recipes of how we can work on the great work of spiritual growth, but also very likely how we can literally work on transmuting base metals into gold, which is one of the gigs, right? But I think this is really speaking also about the incarnational process. And it's a weird thing that he gives gender in a sense to sun and moon when he says sun is its father and moon its mother. We know many astrologers work this way in the natal chart, right? Some of you probably do. I've seen it work for sure. The sun is our father, the moon is our mother. I've seen it absolutely not work, and you've probably had both experiences, I would imagine. I mean, it's interesting to me because I'm sure that that approach comes from the tablets. It's like, great, so, well, what is the wind that have carried it in its belly? What is the earth as its nurse? And I feel that Hermes is speaking about these beings, but he's also speaking about the elements, that the sun is fire and the moon water and the wind air and the earth, right? So what does it mean that the sun is its father? And then he tells us the father of perfection, if the whole world is here. Is he saying that the sun is perfection and that it's right here? Its force is entire if it's converted to earth. I could go on and on and on about why the sun is the father and the moon its mother, and we could get into number theory and why it's suggested that even numbers are feminine and odd numbers are masculine, and that would take us into a whole trip about genetics and biological creation, and I don't think we want to play that game right now. But suffice to say, I'm just going to say this, like the sun is perfection, and the way that its force be entire to be converted into earth, that this is the role of the moon, that the moon reflects that sun into this unique expression of soul. So we will have the moon, as moon right now is in what, 25 degrees Capricorn, just about to go there. And the moon will be at 25 degrees Capricorn, in 27.3 days, right, on average moon's sidereal cycle. The moon is applying to full moon tomorrow. It is a total lunar eclipse, but let's just say it's a full moon, or the phase that the moon's in right now, the day before full moon, right? In this gibbous phase. That happens every 29.53059 days on average, like exactly in this geometric relation, this phase, this aspect to sun. And the same sign and phase about every 19 years or 235 lunations, the Metonic cycle. And yet, moon will never, ever, 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 ever look exactly as she did at the time of your birth, ever. There are too many considerations, the size, the speed, that's all about the distance from Earth, and you can find that in the moon's angle to Lilith on the chart. The latitude, you can find that in the moon's angle to the nodes. the declination, right? So we could go on and on and on like this, and I promise you, you will never find another time where the moon looks exactly like, reflects light just like it did when you were born. It is such a beautiful expression of how unique you are and I am, and this idea of soul, which if we play, as I'm suggesting geometrically, and I think this is what we're doing in our symbolism, which is much more than just pretty pictures. We're saying that soul and spirit are the same size. All right, so I just wanted to lend that, because when I get down with a new moon or a full moon or any reflection of the moon, I know that I'm looking from earth matter, and I'm witnessing the way that this unique expression of spirit is shown through the light of soul. And I really love to engage with clients first by feeding the moon and getting into that and looking at all these things that moon does, because I feel that it carries the medicine of the soul that we bring in with us. And obviously there's many ways to look at this, right? So what's Pluto? What's the south node of the moon, right? A lot of us are working with these beings to describe things that we're coming in with. But I find that moon herself, which was described in the tablets as mother, well, I came from my mom. You know, I'm not so sure about my dad sometimes, but it would have been hard for mom to fake the thing. And we say moon is memories, and moon is instincts, and moon is emotional needs. Well, a baby of 7 minutes old has all of that. And especially of 7 days, has all of that. 7 weeks, maybe even more so, but it seems more than anything we're getting disconnected from it as we learn and grow in this lifetime. So what's that? Past lives or traits handed down through the ancestors, or simple genetic predisposition, or I don't know, but we understand, and the chart helps us understand this, that we do not come in as blank slates. And I feel that the moon describes so much of this. And so I wanted to lay down that wrap before I get into triple eclipse. I had a feeling I would look at some of these charts, but I really want to look at only a few things that are happening with them, because you're all astrologers here, right? So, I mean, do I really want to tell you how to perform your craft? What I would prefer to do is let you know where I'm coming from more of a cosmological or philosophical, or I guess spiritual basis, as I'm engaging with the chart and trying to hear the song of the soul when I engage with the natives chart, or the song of this moment now when we're looking at these beautiful gateways like an eclipse. And the eclipse is powerful. And I'm sure you have very much experienced this in your own life since you've become an astrologer. I mean, people say, well, I'm not an astrologer, I'm an astrology student. It's like, okay, are you tracking the planets? Yeah, the moon's in Capricorn, right? It's like, you're an astrologer. And as far as I'm concerned, that's the criterion. Like, if you're looking at these planets and understanding that they actually do participate with our healing, feeling, and knowing and growing, you are an astrologer. And as far as I'm concerned, a card-carrying astrologer. But, you know, as we're engaging with this celestial symphony, and we're engaging with these beautiful songs and these moments now, you know, and the trick of, do I want to give someone a reading? Right? Because that's this word that we use. I'm personally kind of uncomfortable with it. I use it, but it also has a hidden implication that I can read you like some book. I can read this chart of your birth like some book and tell you what your life's going to be like. And I don't like that so much. There's this really beautiful thing that I first heard through Dane Rudger. It's a Chinese proverb that says, any fool can count the number of seeds in an apple. Not the wisest being can count the number of apples in a seed. And I really feel that astrology works this way, that it's a game of potentials, not promises. And that really many people won't choose to dance to the song of their soul at all. And that's what I love I love to experience the chart as your work of art. And here I am gazing at it. Well, that is amazingly beautiful. That thing reminds me of this thing with my dad. And my dad is bringing my projections and my experiences, though of course we know there's a very beautiful sacred scientific approach to this craft that we are involved with. But that idea of free will, I love to see it as the song And the idea is that every planet is an instrument. It carries its own timbre and tone, and they play the note of the sign in which they reside, and they surround the earth, and they play this chord, this celestial symphony, this soundtrack in a way that is your jam, you know. And that's the fate of the thing. And you've all seen this, you know. We read these dates to people and they laugh or they cry. That's when I met the guy. That's when dad died, you know. Like, we've seen that it is very real. But we can also find many ways that these apples will form seeds, which will form apples, or maybe not at all. That there's fate and there's free will, because you can dance to a song in any way you choose. And you might not choose to dance to a song at all. So it's tempting for us to blame things on Mercury retrograde these next 3 weeks, isn't it? It's tempting for us to run and hide when an eclipse comes around. Or for me to decide, maybe I should wait until like August, September, dang, until I sell this house, because who would sell a house? I'm an irresponsible astrologer if I put my house on the market in the midst of a triple solar eclipse with the total lunar eclipse conjoined Mars and Mercury retrograde and whatnot, you know. And so we want to, I think, be very careful in the way that we practice this craft, and the way that we share it too. I sit so often with folks who are gifted by their mother that reading with the great astrologer when they were 15, and they tell me, yeah, you know, this 35-year-old woman, I've had this experience. You know, I'm just not set up for love. And why? Well, I went to an astrologer and they told me that, so I know you can see that in the chart. And I'm like, I suck at this. That's not what I see at all, you know. It's like, what I'm like trying to see that in this chart. It's like, well, let me like try the sidereal. So it's like, I still don't get it. What's happening here? As either I'm really bad at astrology, or that was a really bad interpretation, because what I see is like, you're really set for love and there's something showing up, and then magically what happens? I get a call from them, you know, 2 years later. This is a very real case. I'm helping them create an electional chart for their wedding. And we, I think, need to be careful with the way that we express in very concrete terms things that will lock folks in. So didn't really know that this was going to be Gemini Brett's strange cosmology and philosophical approach to astrological counseling today, because it said triple eclipse in mythology. So I guess let's go into that space. And Linda, this is either a brilliant time for a break or 15 minutes from now. What do you think?
Okay, well, let's do it now.
Okay.
We'll be back in 15 minutes, everyone.
I think one of the principal things this triple eclipse season says to us is, remember you are an artist. Remember you are a creator. Remember to not get locked down, we astrologers, by the science of the thing, and honor the science by also being involved with the sacred, and honor the fate of the thing by very deeply and intentionally practicing free will. We can utilize the assistance of the chart to show us where to guide our energy and give the gifts of releasing ourselves and choosing change, you know. Why do I say art and creator? Well, for me, you know, and I'm not the first to say this, and probably hopefully you all do. I mean, the 12 signs in a sense are 6 pairs, aren't they? And Leo and Aquarius, there are two sides of the same thing. What is that thing? This is a really wonderful exploration through the signs, right? What is the one thing that Taurus and Scorpio are each one side of Gemini and Sagittarius? And then, of course, we can look at the trines and beyond. But what is this thing that Leo and Aquarius are the polarities of? I asked that to my friend Rick Levine here in Seattle once, and he said love. And he said Leo, that amazing love for self, and Aquarius, that, you know, love for humanity. And then he said, just as I did, no, they're all about love, you know. And my offering is that, among many other things, this is an axis of creation. And that Leo is inspiration. It's that fire that the alchemist showed way up there, and bringing that fire as a roaring flame into the heart. You know, that place where we can channel creation, creator through our own creative will, that inspired force that is such a unique and individual way that we express through our artistic gift, which in the physical arts, we're reminded of our greatest masterpiece, which is our life. And that Aquarius is like the other side, which is imagination. And it's the thing that says, yes, I'm going to, you know, write better in a library or dance better where other people are dancing without restriction. That there's something about tuning into the collective and that inspired thing that's really coming through this shared dream of imagination. And very importantly, I will say that while Leo is creation, Cancer is creator. Or if you want to give them, as the traditions do, to the sun and the moon, or even to the masculine and the feminine, as traditions do, and I question that all the time and also play with that, but ever seen a man give birth? And you won't. You know, there's something about that womb of creation, that the feminine source of it all that we come from, the geometrical tradition that I was rummaging through earlier in the first half of our trip here. You know, we really see that womb of creation as creation, creator herself in this form, the sphere of the goddess. And I think this is lost to Cancer sometimes. We feel more the responsibility to take care of the created ones, and I understand that in so many ways, that this is where we come from. The June solstice degree now aligns right to the hand of the high man, and in this place that the Lakota called the sacred hoop and say our souls come from. So this might just be a tale of the times in the way that I experience the sky, but I think it's very true. And so I think this triple eclipse season is talking to us about these mysteries of creation and asking us to create our way through this. So let's look at a couple of things here. Hold on, just playing with my cameras. Okay. Not the prettiest slide. So one thing I played with, okay, well, how rare is it for us to have a triple eclipse? What is a triple eclipse? It's a partial solar eclipse, a total lunar eclipse every time, and then a partial solar eclipse. All right. You can have a penumbral lunar eclipse and a total solar eclipse and a penumbral lunar eclipse, and some astrologers will argue that penumbral lunar eclipses are an eclipse and they're just as strong, but we don't see them, which seems in so many ways, at least for a sky astrologer and physical astrologer like myself, to be a key part of the mystery. I remember there was a penumbral eclipse a couple of years ago, and I was in the ultimate place to see it, which was Haleakala in Maui, and I brought a crew up there. I was like, here it goes, and we're like, it's a full moon. Like, what's happening here, right? So you can do penumbral lunar, which is like the shadow of the Earth on Moon's surface, and total solar and penumbral lunar. But really, when we're speaking about a triple eclipse season, it is two partial eclipses surrounding a total lunar eclipse. And I didn't go back too far, but these are all the times they happened between 1953 and 2018 in this left column. So this one tomorrow, which two partial solar eclipses are surrounding this total lunar eclipse in Aquarius. And then moving forward from 2029 to 2069, as you can see, there's very interesting patternings in here. You can see some 9s and 18s and weird odd 11 things that speak to eclipse cycles. But another things you'll see here is these L's and these stars. All right, and the double star in one case. So the stars just speak about if they're very, very close to the nodes. And the L's speak about if they're close to Black Moon Lilith. So because that was kind of my first working hypothesis of why we can have a triple eclipse. So you probably know that usually we have 2 eclipses in an eclipse season, and the eclipse seasons come around about every 6 months. Really, it's 173 days, but who's counting? The reason why the eclipse year is shorter than a solar year or a tropical year is because the nodes retrograde. So eclipses happen, we know, when a new moon meets near the lunar nodes, because a new moon is moon between Earth and Sun. But on typical new moons, the moon's either up there or down there. We don't see it. It's under the beams of the sun. But if the moon and the sun meet at a crossing point, either the north or the south lunar node, solar eclipse. Or if a full moon meets at either south or lunar or north lunar node, lunar eclipse, right? And the closer to the nodes, the more total the eclipse. And that's not the only consideration. So we see it in this lunar eclipse, and we bring in Black Moon Lilith. I mean, really, if we wanted to engage with this chart, I encourage you to play with these asteroid goddesses, because you'll see that they come and do amazing things, but we're not going to do that today. I do want to look at Lilith, though. You can see how close this total lunar eclipse, 4 degrees, 44 minutes Aquarius, is to Black Moon Lilith in the last degree of Capricorn. By the way, this is true Black Moon Lilith being, you know, the apogee. So what is an apogee? Or the other focal point of the Moon-Earth relationship. All orbits are not circles, but rather ellipses. And so we have this model of Moon orbiting Earth, but actually what's happening is this ellipse, right? And one of the focal points of the ellipse, which doesn't have one center of orbit, but 2, is in the Earth, but close to Earth's edge. And the other one is somewhere in space between the Earth and the Moon, who in this beautiful dance are kind of doing a dual dance about the sun, right? So that other place where there's nothing there, but it is one of the focal points of this right relationship, this way that Moon and Earth participate, is what we call Black Moon Lilith. Now, who attached Lilith, you know, and these mysteries to this place in space where in a sense there is nothing? I think that's probably an interesting investigation. But if we look at that point, we will be looking also through that point to the point of Moon's elliptical orbit, the place where Moon's orbit is furthest from the Earth. Now, what does that mean? What does it mean when Moon is furthest from the Earth? So I can just tell you astronomically, it's the opposite of a supermoon. We could say it's a micromoon. It's a small moon. It's literally visibly much smaller. It's further from the Earth, which also means slower. So when you have a moon in somebody's chart can join Lilith, we can get very mythical about that, and we should. And we can get into the symbols and the language about that, and we should. But also get into the astronomy of that. That means a small moon. That means a far moon. That means a slow moon. Now, what does that mean? Well, it depends what moon means to you. And so I took this whole cosmological trip earlier when I'm talking about Earth is matter and Moon is soul. Well, what would a far moon be? Is that a soul that doesn't want to incarnate? Is that a soul who's more connected in a sense to the mysteries of the oneness because it's further from matter? Is it going to take longer for the embodiment to happen? I've seen that work in charts. I've seen it not work in charts. It's my current running theory and my personal cosmology, and I reserve my right to change my mind and heart tonight. But that's what I feel with Lilith. And why is that my initial hypothesis of why this would allow for a triple solar eclipse? Let me show you. Okay, so we push some buttons and we'll go over here, right? Okay. lunar eclipse, right? And so what's happening? We have a full moon and a syzygy, which is just a wonderful word. Would be a great Scrabble play if there were enough Y's. And it means the alignment of three things. Well, I will say these are the three parts of the philosophy: spirit, matter, and soul, or sun, earth, and moon. And this is, of course, happening a lunar eclipse at a full moon. And it's the moon who's close enough to the node so that it's actually passing through Earth's shadow. And we experience a lunar eclipse everywhere on Earth that can see the moon. Earth is much bigger than the moon. We'll say it's 4 times bigger, but it's actually 11/3 the size of the moon by diameter, which is an important thing in the geometrical traditions and shown at the Great Pyramid of Giza and beyond. But the Earth's shadow is enough to blank out the entire moon for everywhere on Earth that's on the dark side, that's on the night side. So if you can see the moon, you can see the eclipse, right? It's different for a solar eclipse, as we know. And the moon turns to blood. The moon goes red or orange. And I love to say that this is the reminder and this great witness of this expression of spirit, that here on Earth, where we incarnate in these bodies with blood running through their veins, we can have witness of spirit and soul in this way. And the lunar eclipse reminds us of that. What also does it do? And I wish I had one of those images of all the phases of the lunar eclipse. Have you gone to see one? I mean, they're amazing. When the first time I brought folks out to see a lunar eclipse, it was the first of that tetrad of 4 total lunar eclipses or blood moons in a row that we had in 2014 and 2015. It was April 2014, and I brought a crew down to Arizona and gave a wrap there. And then we were out, and the eclipse didn't start till like 3 in the morning. They're like drumming by the fire, like keeping it going and sharing. And then this thing started. And at first I was kind of bummed, right? I mentioned Rick before. One of my favorite things he's ever said to me is that I was just getting into this, and I said, "Hey, Rick, where's a cool place in Seattle that I can go to see the stars?" He said, "There's this great field down south. It's called Arizona." I love that joke. And it's not a joke, and I've taken it to heart. In fact, I am next week, and I've gone down many a time to connect to the sky, right? And I try not to go at full moon time, because while I love the moon, she also eats the stars and eats the sky. And so I'm down there this night, I'm playing my drum, and it's beautiful silver lit in this moonlight. And I'm also like, why did I come to Arizona to see this? Because I can't see the Milky Way or any stars anyway. Well, that was true until the eclipse happened. And if you've witnessed a total lunar eclipse, which is some matter of hours, the shadow of Earth comes in as a curve, and this thing goes down, right? Until we're totally covered up and then uncovered in the matter of hours. And basically, well, it's not exact because you can't get like the half moon, right? You get the Vesica instead. You get to see every phase of the moon that it takes a month to experience in 2, 3, 4, 5 hours time. So there's a quickening that goes down. It, like, we take a month into hours, right? And the amazing thing that I experienced down there was like, oh, drag, I can only see the bright stars that I see in Seattle anyway. Why did I come to Arizona? And here comes the shadow, and we dim the light, and suddenly the moon is like this orange mystery red, and the Milky Ways popped out, and the moon was right with Spica at the time, and Mars was on the scene. It was amazing, you know? And so also to experience that, to experience when do we see the Milky Way and everything when we're in the dark sky space, mostly, I mean, most perfectly at new moon, right? Where the moonlight can't drown the lights of the night. And then when do we not see the Milky Way, even if we're in Sedona or wherever, full moon? And so I also got to experience the entirety of the month in the witness of things away from the moon. So I see all these phases happening in the Earth's shadow, claiming the moon and separating from the moon is reborn in that sense. But I'm also seeing the stars come out and then go away again. And so that image and that experience, that truth of the quickening is something about these eclipses that also give us the opportunity to make shifts like that. So things that we've been building up to, and we'll hear this again, why do I see people changing? Why does it take me so long? Well, there's a way that we can work with the eclipse energy and we might have been building up to it all life or lifetimes or 7 years or who knows. But when the change happens, it is like that. And there's something in an eclipse, that energy, that seed that can really spark a transformational shift instantaneously. Lunar eclipses occur when a full moon aligns within 12 degrees and 15 minutes of the lunar nodes. The lunar eclipse will be total if within 3.5 degrees. The bottom of the screen, the lunar eclipse will be partial if between 6 degrees and 12.25 degrees. Okay? But there's this window where it might be total or it might be partial. Between 3.5 degrees and 6 degrees. There's kind of this sweet spot. Well, why? Why sometimes can a lunar eclipse happen partially when the moon is 4.5 degrees from the node, and why other times is that total? Well, this has to do with, let's get back to this slide, how big the moon is, right? Because the moon is going to be completely covered by Earth's shadow. And how long a lunar eclipse is? It's about this. How big is the moon? Well, I'll tell you, the moon has a radius of 1,080 miles. I wish I could tell you in kilometers, but I also will just say 1,080 miles. And I can tell you that the moon is 3/11 the size of the Earth, and that the moon is 1/400 the size of the sun, and these things, okay? But to Earth's view, the size of the moon changes. We have these supermoons. We have these micromoons. Why? Ellipses. How do we see it in the chart? Lilith. Yeah? So if the moon is conjoined Lilith or near Lilith, as this total lunar eclipse tomorrow will be, that literally means far moon, slow moon, small moon. And if the moon is small, the shadow of Earth takes more time to pass it by, yeah? And the moon can be here and we still get Earth's shadow. Where if the moon is big, you see that partiality. All right, so using hands to try to express astronomical concept. And so our job is to take that and say, what does it mean about the soul, right? And I leave that to you. But my gig is to present some of this very real astronomical stuff, not just to nerd out, right? But to get into the what is happening. So now I can ask why and what does it mean? And instead of just telling you what my teachers told me or tell you what I've read in the 1,000 books or in the gazillion EA Zoom meetings that I watch online, to say, well, let's just express and connect to what's happening in nature and then ask nature to inform us through our own experience what that means. And it should be different for you than it is for me, really. So we want this thing to be scientific, but folks are going to come to you for a session rather than to me because they like how you work with the nature and translate the thing. And the same is true for me. And anyway, so small moon or big moon. So my first running hypothesis of why there is triple eclipse possibility would be that the lunar eclipse is near Lilith, making this smaller moon. And therefore, we're able to see a longer experience of Earth's shadow on the moon. And the moon will have a total eclipse even if it's further from the sun. And we go back here and all these ones with the L, that's true for. And you'll see it's about half. So the total lunar eclipses in the middle of the solar eclipse seasons are at these L's. All right, let me show you the other side of that hypothesis first. It's that the solar eclipse, either before or after, I'll go 3 charts. So again, try chart wheel here. partial solar eclipse in Cancer, total lunar eclipse in Aquarius, and partial solar eclipse in Leo. And we'll see that while the total lunar eclipse is close to Lilith, the partial solar eclipse is opposite Lilith before, and the partial solar eclipse after is also opposite Lilith. Okay, and the metaphysical luminaries that some folks in European schools now are playing with, they call that point Priapus, the point that's opposite Lilith. What do the astronomers call it? They call it supermoon, right? And we can visibly see this thing. The moon is closer to Earth. What does that mean? Faster, bigger, right? So I love to teach Black Moon Lilith as far Moon Lilith, as slow Moon Lilith, as small Moon Lilith. And the opposite point is big, fast, close. And I think these carry very important cosmological considerations. You can see this in the moon, and they certainly affect this idea of eclipse longevity and totality. Okay, because let's look at the solar eclipse situation, astronomically speaking. This, yeah? And so with the solar eclipse, we do not, am I not sharing my screen?
No, not at the moment.
My bad. I wasn't sharing these charts either.
No, you were. It just went off about like 30 seconds ago.
Oh, okay, cool. So
Okay.
we saw the charts, we saw the eclipse alignments to Lilith. Great, here we go. Zoom rookie, sorry, I should not be one. So this is the solar eclipse, right? Moon coming between Earth and Sun, aligned to the node, so it's not up there, or she's not down there. She's actually visibly crossing between Earth and Sun. And this is not witnessed everywhere where it is day on Earth. Why? Because the moon is smaller than the Earth. And so I take this projector and I move a tiny thing in front of it, and it doesn't eclipse, right? The lemon essential oil will not eclipse all of my face from your point of view. Well, what about now? You know, now it does. So there is something too about the moon's size that is going to affect the longevity of a solar eclipse. And I hope that makes sense. When the moon is bigger, she's going to eclipse more of the sun. She doesn't have to be as aligned perfectly, and these are the nodes to the center of the sun, for a total solar eclipse to occur. Yeah? When the moon is bigger, we have more total solar eclipses. When the moon is small, there's a point where she gets so small, like if the moon is at Lilith, she cannot create a total solar eclipse because she's not big enough to eclipse the entire disk of the sun. And we have the annular eclipse, or the ring of fire. Yeah? So again, for me, I want to contemplate Earth as matter and moon as soul and sun as spirit, and consider what are these far and near things, and consider how they play in eclipse dynamics. Like I went and saw the total solar eclipse here last year, minute and a half. Well, right in the Luxor temple in 2027 is a 7-minute total solar eclipse. You know, do you think that's a big moon? And the answer is yes, right? So this idea of the way that Lilith participates is amazing, and it's powerful, and it's true, but it's not the only truth. Solar eclipses occur when a new moon aligns within 18.5 degrees of either north or south lunar node. It will be total if within 10 degrees, or 9 degrees 55 minutes. It might be total if within 11.25 degrees. It will definitely not be total. It will be partial if between 11 degrees 15 minutes and 18 degrees and 31 minutes. And by the way, it's not just total or annular, because again, the moon might not be large enough to eclipse the entire sun. I mean, the fact that this can happen at all is one of the coolest things ever. In science classes, what a coincidence, and it won't always be this way. Well, even if it won't always be that way, I think it's even more important that we consider this thing. So if we want to play mathematically, the moon is about 1/400th the size of the sun, and on average 400 times closer, so they appear to be the same size to earthly eyes. To me, what does that mean? Here on matter, we can see that soul and spirit are reflections. It's not a division. They're the same size. In the teachings of the solar eclipse is literally where I found that in my own eyes. 108 is the next number that is so fun. Because on average, and these you can see accuracies here. This is done by my friend Joe Dubs, and you can see his website, or at least the link to this image down there. His website's great, by the way, joedubs.com. The moon is about 108 moons from Earth, moon diameters. The sun is about 108 sun diameters from Earth. The sun is about 108 Earth diameters in diameter. 108 beads on the mala, 108 names of the divine goddess, 108 steps on Jacob's ladder, 108 double stitches on a baseball, 108 square feet of grass necessary for each free-range chicken, if they're to be considered this way by the FDA. This number 108 is so powerful and magical. And then the Earth is 108, sorry, the moon, 1080 miles in diameter. 108 is 6 Saros cycles by year. We go on and on and on. The atomic weight of silver, long associated with moon, 108. Right? What a trip. All right, so this idea of the eclipses with Lilith, it proved not to be the case when I was checking this out. So what is it? And what do we see that's true for all of these eclipses? July, June, August, early August, July, June, August, early August, July, August, kind of later August, June, July, May. That May one's kind of an outlier, actually. And they can happen in October. They really could happen anywhere if they get the double star. And I can't remember what my criteria was for the double star, but what that means, for one thing, it meant I couldn't sleep this night. But it also meant that it was significantly close to the lunar nodes, like the lunar eclipse was right on the nodes. Because what are these conditions for an eclipse? We've got to be close to the nodes. Whether it's solar or lunar, we've got to be close to the nodes. Okay, so sun's got to be within 18.5 degrees of either lunar node for some type of eclipse to go down. Yeah? That's a good one to remember, 18.5. First of all, if you've studied eclipses, check that out. Saros cycle, 18 years, 18.03 years, okay? Metonic cycle, 19 years. And then we're talking about 18.5. Well, I mean, what's the transit of the nodes? 18.5 years. Okay, 18.618. But you see what I'm saying? We're between these two gateways that embrace a nodal return. I mean, there's so much magic when you play with the mathematics and the numbers of Earth, Moon, and Sun. And the eclipses teach us an incredible mystery. So 18.5 degrees of a new moon within the lunar nodes, either north or south, to be a solar eclipse, at least a partial solar eclipse. Well, when's the next new moon going to be? 29.5 days later, right? The lunation cycle, 29.53059 on average. So 29.5 days, right? Part of my geek voice. So how far does the sun move in 29.5 days? And we like to say that the sun moves 1 degree per day, right? 365 days of the year, 0.242 and change, 360 degrees in a circle. And so we say that's close enough for jazz. The sun moves 1 degree through the zodiac per day. Sometimes it does. So how far, if we give the sun 1 degree per day, does the sun move in 29.5 days? And the answer, of course, is 29.5 degrees. Okay. Well, if the sun's within a node for a solar eclipse within 18.5 degrees, and then it moves 29.5 degrees, is it still close enough to the node for a solar eclipse to happen? And the answer would be yes if the nodes don't also move. And to really get into that magic, I'd be tripping out a little too far. So I'm going to leave it there. I would kind of cut to the chase here and say this. It is more likely for us to have a new moon close enough to the nodes, followed by a next new moon close enough to the nodes so that they are both solar eclipses, if what? If the sun is moving slowly. When does the sun move slowly? When the earth moves slowly. When does the earth move slowly? The earth isn't a circle about the sun either. Yeah, the earth has an elliptical orbit of the sun. We are closest to the sun in early January, and this is called perihelion, close to the sun. And we are furthest from the sun in early July, and this is called aphelion, right? Furthest from the sun. It's one of the reasons why we can survive, and I could go on and on about that, but let's not do that right now. First of all, let me play with this cosmologically from my thing, right? What is it to have earth, matter, and spirit far apart? What is it to have them close together? And I will just offer that as a contemplation if you'd like to engage with it. I don't have the answers. I think it's a cool question. And that's what these eclipses are asking me to contemplate. So the reason why we have these triple eclipses around July is because that is when the earth is furthest from the sun. And therefore the earth is moving slowest. And it's not such a significant difference, but it is a difference, and it's really alive in the teaching of Mars at this time too. So I want to get you into this idea of aphelions and perihelions, a planet's distance from the sun. We like to say that the sun is 93 million miles away from Earth. That's the average. When Earth is closest to the sun, as it is in early January, and the metaphysical luminary folks call this the diamond. It's in early Capricorn. Sun is 91.5 million miles away. It's 1.5 million miles closer. So not so much by percentage, but 1.5 million miles. That seems like a thing. The Earth, because closer to the sun, is moving faster. And if the sun was moving at the rate through the zodiac, right? Because when Earth moves faster about the sun, from Earth's point of view, sun moves faster about the Earth. If the rate was held that the sun moves through the zodiac at that time, our year would be 12 days shorter. And it's interesting that it's 12. If in July, when Earth is furthest from the sun, which is the 93 million miles plus 1.5 million or 94.5 million miles, if at that time our year would be the year plus 12 days, and the sun is not moving 1 degree per day through the zodiac, it's close, but it's slower, and that gives a greater opportunity for a new moon and the following new moon to stay close enough to the lunar nodes for us to have a partial solar eclipse, followed by a partial solar eclipse the next lunation. And always in between, it's going to be a total lunar eclipse. And that's the nature of a triple eclipse season. So why am I going off about planetary proximity? I mean, that's seriously nerd business that has no room for us in an astrological consultation, or doesn't it, you know? I mean, seriously, does it matter when the sun is larger, closer, faster, versus further, smaller, slower? What an amazing thing that the sun is actually closer to us in Capricorn and further from us in Cancer, right? Eat that, Northern Hemispherians. right? And it makes the seasons less extreme in the northern hemisphere than they would be if the opposite were true, and more extreme in the southern hemisphere. And I think Australians who report seasonal extremes can say this, and it's an amazing thing. 88% of people live north of the equator, and there's way more land north of the equator, right? I mean, Melbourne, Australia is the same distance from the equator as Athens, Greece, or San Francisco, California. And below that, you've got what, like Tasmania, and then Antarctica. Certainly the very tip of South America is at further and more extreme latitudes. But there's much less land in extreme latitudes where you could experience things like, you know, daytime all day long, right? Or the sun never sets, or the sun never rises, and whatnot. Okay. So one thing I wanted to bring to this share is that triple eclipse happen when Earth is moving slow, which means sun is moving slow. And so the eclipses themselves give us these opportunities of the quickening. If you've seen a total solar eclipse, the sun sets everywhere. It gets dark. The flowers close literally, right? It gets cold. If you've been there, you know this. I'm glad I was told this before I saw my first one last year, and I brought a jacket and a hat. It was freezing. It was super bright, sunny, August, Northern Hemisphere, summer hot. And we climbed this mountain and I'm sweating. And then the thing happened and I'm like, oh, and we were all freezing. And some people did not listen and didn't bring jackets, and they were hating it for a minute and a half, and actually longer than that. It was like it turned to night and then it was day within 2 minutes. So this idea of the quickening, but in the triple solar eclipse gate, that is combined with a slowness to bring balance. And what it will always mean that we have, it won't always mean that the solar eclipses are in different signs, because I guess you could do it twice in the same sign. Like we had 2 Leo new moons last year. I think we could have 2 solar eclipses in the same sign, but I'm not sure. But in this case, certainly that's not happening. Cancer solar eclipse followed by a Leo solar eclipse. And it's a premonition of what? It's a premonition that the nodes are about to change signs. Because eclipses happen near the nodes. And so the nodes have been Leo-Aquarius since what, May 7th, May 9th, 2017. And they regress because they move backwards into Cancer and Capricorn on November 6th, 2018, 1.55 years per sign. So this Cancer eclipse is the foretelling that the nodes are getting ready to shift. And what will happen in these eclipses too, if you've studied the Saros cycle, and I presented Saros cycles to EA Zoom meetings, I think Sue did as well. This means the end of a Saros and the beginning of another one. There's a passing, there's a shake, a handshake, there's an exchange. And I want to show that to you. So we'll go to my favorite eclipse place online for like research. I really recommend you get down with it. It's called moonblink.info, like the moon blinking, right? A lunar eclipse. Then you click Hermit Eclipse. And then you can cruise down here on the left side to Eclipse Search. And you can search any year, like the year of your birth. And you can see all the eclipses that year. You can set the time zone and all that, by the way. So like, for example, we can click on tomorrow's total lunar eclipse. And I can show you that it's totally visible in most of Europe, Africa, much of Australia, much of South Africa. And some will see the moon rising in an eclipse state and see the end of it, or some will see the eclipse and it sets before it ends. Some will see all of the thing happening. We get to find out that this is a 1 hour and 43 minutes eclipse, which is a very short one, by the way. And that actually totally
Gemini?
surprised. Yeah, go ahead.
Could you go back to the previous picture? Image?
Yeah, right here.
The one with the showing where the eclipse can be seen on the world map.
Yeah, do you see it?
Bottom, yeah.
Yep.
Can you please explain how to read this map?
Sure. The Earth spins west to east, and the moon is also moving in its secondary motion west to east. So eclipses go west to east. And so basically, places here where, you know, totally dimmed out, like in North America, we don't see the eclipse at all. You can see that this is the place of the maximum eclipse. Some of these folks are going to see the eclipse rise. Like, so look, partial eclipse. Let me see if moon sets in the west during the opening partial eclipse. So over here, they're seeing the eclipse start, but then the moon sets, right? Over here, they're seeing it get total and then it sets. Over here, they're seeing like all of totality, then it gets partial and then it sets. Between these two places, they see all of it. The opposite is true over here. These folks are going to see the total eclipse rise. Some people are going to see the end of the eclipse rising, and they'll just kind of miss the blood moon because it was happening, you know, it was happening before the moon rose. Does that make sense?
Oh, yes, that's a great explanation. Thank you.
Yeah, cool. So yeah, play with these on Moonblink. They're great. They get these from the NASA site, the canon that most folks do. But what I want to show you as well, that in the eclipse search, and you can search by date also, you know, it's, let's say your Venus is in the 1st degree of Scorpio, which happens when the sun is at October 23rd-ish, right? You could type October 23rd and see every eclipse in a century that aligned to your Venus. You get it? So this resource is amazing. Thank you to the astronomers who feed us with the tools that we use to heal ourselves and other people. So here's this lunar eclipse, and we see the date, but we also see that it belongs, and this is the astronomical naming convention, to Lunar Saros Series 129. And I will see that that Lunar Saros began in 1351, and many people will cast this chart and say that it speaks to the nature of the entire family of eclipses that come around on average every 18 days, 18 years, 11 days, and 8 hours, or definitely every 223 lunations. And so this one's around until 2613. And you can see in the window between, where are we here? 1910 and 2090, they will be total lunar eclipses. I'm very interested in the middle one of the whole family. That's the most total eclipse. But importantly, we see here, so the first eclipse season of this year, total lunar, partial solar. If you do some eclipse searches, you'll find that years tend to alternate between total solars, like last year, total lunars, total solars. It's not always 1-to-1, but it follows a close beat, and that's an interesting thing to consider. Was I born in like a year of totality for solar energy or totality for lunar energy? But here we see a solar, lunar, solar, all within a month, right? One lunation. So new moon, full moon, new moon, solar, lunar, solar. And we'll see that July 13th, 2018, in my times when it was July 12th, Solar Saros Series 117 began all the way back in 792 and will end not long from now in 2054. And that the Leo solar eclipse, August 11th, Solar Saros Series 155, began only in 1928. And then will run, on average, they run for 1,280 years, all the way till 2992. So this eclipse has come to take the place of, so 155 has come to take the place of 117. And other astrologers like Bernadette Brainy will actually assign them the same eclipse number. I cannot remember the astrologer who came up with that numbering system. That's brilliant. Because basically, here's this eclipse. It's a south node eclipse, which means it started at the south pole and slowly snakes its way up and around the globe and will finish at the North Pole. And before it's done, 2054, another one comes in to take its place. And so between 1928, and we can look at these years, 1928, 1946, 64, 1982, 2000, 2018, 2036, 2054, we will have a triple solar eclipse featuring these 3 cycles. And then it will, after that, just be a total lunar followed by a partial solar for a time. And then it'll be they'll turn into partial lunar and total solar, actually. So who cares? What does it all mean? It's a statement of significant transformation. It's a statement of something that's been around since 792. That in 1928, and what was happening on Earth then? Pluto, and then comes this new eclipse that will eventually take its place, and for some time they're kind of traveling together. One at the northern pole about to end, one at the southern pole just starting, bringing this balance, bringing this idea of the distant past and the distant future. All that's happening in every triple eclipse season, and it's all centered around a total lunar eclipse, the blood moon. All right, so a couple, go ahead.
Well, can I ask you a question? So is it kind of like the ending of a phase, and so they go together in 3, so the other person can kind of morph into the new cycle while the other one's kind of ending?
Yeah, totally. I mean, so some images, one is like the relay race and passing the baton, but a better one is like, the elder shaman is about to transition into the next plane. And so they bring the apprentice around and they download like everything they know into the new being who will carry the wisdom for the 7 future generations. Or like I see that image. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry, go on.
I see that image of that movie Dune, where there's like the blue-eyed old lady, like takes the little baby and just like gives her all of the wisdom of the shamanic lineage or whatever.
Oh, I was just going to ask, do you think it has anything to do with the beginning, like kind of the Aquarian age going in?
I think that not necessarily, because this is happening throughout time, but I do feel that when we have experiences of long cycles that are participating together, I mean, this thing only started in 792, which was after the dawning of the age of Pisces, right? But there certainly is something about Aquarius Mars at the south lunar node aligned to this total lunar eclipse that I do think speaks of one of the transition points into this Aquarian age. And so let's look at that, but let's look first at Pluto and the solar eclipse, the partial solar eclipse that began. And I guess I'm going to try to do this like lightning fast, so it seems like there's some other questions. But let me just tune this down. I'm going to share my screen, and we will look at this one solar eclipse here, okay? And so we know that the solar eclipse, the 21st degree of Cancer, was very strongly configured to Pluto. So that in its very nature says what power? And we see Jupiter, who's been in Scorpio since October 10th, 2017, expanding that nature that in modern times we very much associate with Pluto. And that interests me. Just very quickly, Mercury, who stationed retrograde yesterday, the only planet that he will aspect in the same way thrice during his retrograde motion is Jupiter. Leo Mercury squared Jupiter weeks ago, and now will retrograde square Jupiter again, and after going direct will square Jupiter a 3rd time. The Aries retrograde cycle for Mercury featured 3 squares to Capricorn Saturn. I always find that to be very important. Which planet will Mercury configure in the same way to thrice during his retrograde cycle? It brings so much attention in. And think of it, Mercury in Leo, Sun, right? Jupiter in Scorpio, Pluto, or traditionally speaking, Mars. And this solar eclipse, Sun, is aligned to Pluto, and the total lunar eclipse is aligned to Mars. You think Jupiter's involved? This total lunar eclipse chart, we also see what? Uranus on the square. We know Uranus recently ingressed Taurus. That was May 15th. This is a significant happening. If you look to the date in November, it's November 6th, that the nodes regress from Leo-Aquarius to Cancer Capricorn. You will find that it's the same day that Uranus regresses from Taurus back to Aries for some unfinished business. And the moon is there in Scorpio to complete a fixed square. And then when the nodes shift back to the cardinal signs, Cancer, Capricorn, and Uranus shifts back to the cardinal sign, Aries, there's Venus in Libra, retrograde, waiting for them in that moment, shifting from a grand fixed square to a grand cardinal square. It's an amazing thing, and that's a tale, I guess, for another time. But I will say that it's set up here. And I think it's very important to honor that, yes, we have eclipses aligned to Pluto, but we've never had it aligned to Pluto like this. Why? Because Pluto is at Pluto's nodes. And this is a very important consideration. I will say this is especially powerful for folks who were born in 1980, 1981, 1982. But at that time in the 80s, and I can, whoa, I didn't even know I can move that thing. And I can do that? Great. I can get to that time very easily because all I have to do is take Pluto, who's right now here. Let me grab a little highlighter thing. What happened? There's Pluto, okay? Kind of hard to see, the hidden one. But in the 80s, Pluto was way up here. Pluto was at his northern bending. Sorry, this thing's getting a little hard to control. Here's 81, okay? So Pluto is way up there. Here is the solar system. All planets have their own gig. Most of them are kind of flat. The ecliptic is defined by the Earth-Sun relationship, and Pluto is doing this amazing elliptical thing that gets 17 degrees above and 17 degrees below, or north of and south of would be better to say, during the course of his 250-year orbit. And so in the 80s, if a solar eclipse aligned to Pluto, it was, you know, Earth, Moon, Sun, Pluto up there, right? Well, what's happened now is Pluto literally like on the day, right, or right around the time of this partial solar eclipse, Pluto has come down to his south node. And so from the northern hemisphere, we're seeing Pluto cross from heavenly places down towards the ground. In the southern hemisphere, the opposite is true. But either way, Pluto is now on the plane. And so this eclipse, quite literally, let me quit this thing because it runs the fan. This eclipse was very literally Earth, Moon, Sun, Pluto. And we've seen that on the chart many times since Pluto was discovered, many times before. But it used to be Earth, Moon, Sun, Pluto. Or Earth, Moon, Sun, Pluto, depending on which side of the Earth you're looking from. Now they are configured. We are talking about like a syzygy plus a fourth. In the heart of Pluto. I mean, this amazing power. So we see this on the chart regardless. I mean, these degrees, Cancer opposite Capricorn, but configured to Pluto's nodes. Moon has nodes, and that's why we have eclipses. And that to me is where soul and spirit become one. Well, what is the crossing point of Pluto in the sun? And that's what this eclipse that started this triple eclipse season was configured to. This is a magical and powerful thing. And Pluto moves slowly as the Earth or the sun are moving slowly now. So I wouldn't say we should expect to feel this thing like that. There's a lot of debate about how long an eclipse lasts for, right? This is one that even though they're kind of quicker eclipses, I would say that it's going to take its time to unfold. All right, so finally, just because I want to give a little time for a couple questions. Let's look at this lunar eclipse chart. Here. And check out Mars. I mean, it's right on Mars. So it's amazing. Again, with Jupiter and Scorpio squaring the nodes now, I mean, it's loose. It's much stronger from Uranus. I mean, there's a bit of a fixed grand square or grand cross going on, depending on what kind of orbs you allow. But Jupiter, Scorpio, traditionally ruled by Mars, modern times by Pluto, and the solar eclipse that started this thing aligned to Pluto, and now this total lunar eclipse aligned to this total Mars. And why do I say that about Mars? So let's go back into some play. Mars retrograde. Now, when any planet is retrograde, it is closest to Earth, right? Because your Venus or Mercury retrograde, let me go to right now. That means as Mercury just stationed retrograde, how can I tell? Because I can see here that Mercury is about to pass Earth by. And I know the very middle of the retrograde is when Mercury lines between Earth and the Sun for Cazimi. It's a Mercury-Sun conjunction, traditionally called the inferior, which does not mean less than, but rather below, or interior, we could say, conjunction, because Mercury's between Earth and Sun. Mercury or Venus have two types of conjunctions. The other one is as far from Sun as possible. As far from Earth as possible. So when Mercury or Venus are conjunct Sun and direct, they are at what's known as apogee, far from Earth. And when Mercury or Venus, like here's the Venus Cazimi in October, are passing Earth by, they are retrograde. And so when they are retrograde conjunct the Sun, it's the interior conjunction, and they are at perigee, closest to Earth. And that is always true for any planet in the middle of the retrograde period. So we go back to now, and what do we see about Earth and Mars? Bam, right? I mean, their spheres are becoming one. This is the middle of Mars's retrograde. Mars retrogrades on average 2 months at a time. This one's been about exactly that. Mars station retrograde in my time zone, June 26th. Now he reaches, well, Sun opposes Mars July 26th, and then stationary direct August 27th. It's like exactly 2 months, and the very middle point is Earth's closest approach to Mars. So it's what we call Mars perigee, close to Earth. And you can see this on people's charts. How far were planets from the Earth? If you really learn to see the synodic cycles, and I cannot tell you how powerful this source, it's called Solar System Scope. And you can play online, solarsystemscope.com for free or download for cheap. This is an older version. I prefer it for a few reasons. But you can cast a chart like your birth chart and then cast the heliocentric model and see these things like planetary proximities. Now, why are retrogrades tricky? And some of it goes back to old fear, but some of it's very real. I just look at this thing like ripples. And the Sun is the source. It's the rock in the pond. And here's Earth just surfing the wave, man. Well, what happens when Mercury comes between Earth and Sun? We get that interference pattern. The wave is gone. What happens when Earth comes between Mars and Sun? We're messing with Mars's ripple. And you can see this in water ripple tank experiments, Earth has an interference pattern too. Our ripple goes away. Another way to think of these retrogrades, because the middle of any planetary retrograde means perigee, means closest to Earth, their energies are combining. Yeah? I mean, we might want to keep Mars, Mars, and Earth, Earth. So what happens when we make a Mars, Earth? How do we experience that here? Okay. So when a full moon is conjoined a planet, that means, by the way, it's an outer planet, an exterior planet, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, beyond. It also means that that planet is in the middle of its retrograde period. And it also means that that planet is closest to the Earth. Now, this particular Earth-Mars is exceptionally close. And if you have seen Mars with your face in the last few days or weeks, you know this is true. Because Mars is like, Mars! And it's like crazy, you know? I mean, it's like, feels like he's competing with Venus brightness and dimming Jupiter. And it's red and real. In the southern hemisphere where many of you live, he's like up there, you know? For us in the northern hemisphere, Aquarius, where Mars is now a very low sign. And now Sun is opposed Mars, so that means Mars starts rising at sunset like a full moon. and dominating the night, culminating in the middle of the night. So we're going to see lots of Mars, and he's very bright, and this is the reason why. It's always true at the middle of Mars's retrograde, because that means Earth is passing Mars, and therefore perigee, closest. But Mars is also super close to what's called his perihelion. And I'm realizing that that older version of Solar System Scope doesn't show it as well as the newer version. So let me just show you this real quick. Get a little bit of the clutter out of here. All right, so here's Mars's orbit, and this, you know, not to scale, but it does a decent job of showing us that this orbit is an ellipse. All orbits are. Earth is much more circular than Mercury. He's got this funky thing happening. You can see Mercury's closest there and furthest here. For Mars, the perihelion, and that means closest to the sun in our epoch, is 6 degrees Pisces. And that, where are you guys? Hold on. Okay, so in that, on the opposite side, in Virgo, Mars is furthest from the sun. Now the perigee, Mars closest to Earth in every cycle is when Earth is passing Mars by the middle of the 2-month retrograde period. But if Mars is exceptionally close to the sun, it's even closer. If Earth is far from the sun, which is happening now, it does so mostly in July, it's even closer. And that's going down now. Mars is right here. But this is a really fantastic thing, and another thing that shows us the duality and the amazing play in this eclipse that in a sense also goes both ways. I'm going to show you a very quick 1-minute video. And you know what, let me see, I'm going to share my sound so we can listen, I think, to the flute of John Dumas here. And we'll look at this video of Mars's retrograde loop. Okay, so what I really want to show is how far south of the ecliptic plane. This is from the northern hemisphere view, because in the southern hemisphere, zodiac's the other way, and that would bring Mars closer to the top of the sky in southern latitude. How far from the plane he is. Mars is out of bounds now, extremely so. He's also, I woke up with this term the other day, extra lunar, where out of bounds would be a description of declination, and extra lunar is what I'm saying for when a planet's beyond a latitude that the moon can get, and Mars is also that now. So I want to show you one last thing, and we will look at the wonderful program called Stellarium. And let me open this up, because I want to show you an image of this total lunar eclipse. I can't do it from Seattle where Stellarium is going to open up, because we don't see the eclipse in Seattle. So I'll go over to, let's see, I'll just go to like, I'll go back to Giza, somewhere around here. Aha, Egypt, okay. And then we need to get this thing some hours ahead. And we'll see the moon rise here. And then, let me zoom in. And we will see the lunar eclipse happening. Like here, okay? So the moon is gonna turn the color of Mars. They're super close on the chart. This is in no way near an occultation. because Mars has extreme southern latitude. He's far from his nodes. He's actually right between his geocentric nodes, if you know that language. Extreme southern latitude. The moon's latitude, what? 0, right? Which is why we can have an eclipse, because it's on the ecliptic plane. So all these things that I was describing about the experience of a lunar eclipse, you go out there, bright full moon, I wanted to see the stars. Suddenly the shadow comes in, you know, the stars start coming out. We see this curvature, even in the full moon, it gets red. It basically mimics the color of Mars. Mars, who is so bright and so powerful right now, but not so much with a full moon right there. Well, what happens when the full moon gets darkened? Mars becomes brighter than the moon, even though the moon is right there. In Aquarius. What does this mean? Well, one thing I'll say, and you know, we began this quest in Cancer, in the waters, feelings. We end this quest with the eclipse in Leo, so many associations with the heart, though I will say also the fire of the Hara. And yes, we should get out of the head and get into the heart. And Mars says, yeah, pardon me, but fuck that. You know, Mars is like, go up into the high air, into the consciousness. Look down on your creation. Look down on this masterpiece that you are painting in the canvas of your life, and try to look in a place where you're not so tied to the weight of the feelings that are happening within the experience, so you can see how this is an amazing, courageous choice for your soul to grow, whether it's a state of pain or a state of pleasure, and things are slowing down and speeding up. Now, Jupiter, on the other hand, who's on the square, he is what? He is like, yo, express your feelings in Scorpio, right? He says you can serve the suppressed to control you, or you can control the expressed to serve you, right? So we know one of the wonderful things about the songs of soul is that we're all schizophrenic. All these notes have different things happening, and some of them agree, and some of them are very tense because they have different operations happening. There's ways that Pluto and Mars, whether in modern or traditional view, Pluto and Jupiter, Jupiter's either looking to Pluto or to Mars, or maybe to both. And I think there's this great dance of the way that that medicine and that pain and the pleasure and the wishes and the wounding of this so-called division of head and heart, or even spirit and soul, it's all coming into this eclipse that's asking us to play in such a way that we get that we are so much more than we're taught we are. And we're getting to time, and I'd love to allow some time for a question. So let me just leave with this last thing. We were taught that it is selfish, vain, egoic, arrogant to be full of yourself. Well, who are you supposed to be full of? This is a time where it's about being you and all of you. What an eclipse does, and I had a very strong vision about this, there are shamanic traditions that suggest one thing you should not do is accept food from the spirit world. Take that for what you will. And what I saw when I led people to this total solar eclipse, and I had this an amazing dream, and it was like, oh, let people know that they shouldn't eat during this thing. Because when the eclipse is happening, whether you can see it or not, we measure astrology from the center of Earth. So just because you don't see it doesn't mean you don't be it. It is happening. It's wise when the veil is open to kind of stay centered here and not to eat the pomegranate seeds, if you will. So I would really encourage everyone who has the opportunity to see eclipse to go there, to be there, to witness this thing. I think one of the reasons why the priest said don't look is because you see mysteries that will speak to you in your own language in such a ways that these people tried to preserve so they could control us. And that this is a time where we really come into the strength of fixed energy. And it is one of the gateways into the shifting of the ages that say, fix yourself to fix the world. Choose change before change chooses you. And there is a centeredness and a slowing down that's going to allow us to connect to this rapid opportunity to shift if we choose to. I'll just finish by saying you can search on YouTube, Gemini Brett Eclipse Ritual, and you'll find a 15-minute thing of what I'm doing for this eclipse and stuff that I'm burning tomorrow and the way that I'm going to use the ashes and stuff. And you can play along with that if you want. But most importantly, I would say get into your art, because your life is that. All right, so thank you very much for taking this strange, meandering trip through cosmology and astronomy, and I hope it's planted some seeds that will sprout in your soil in a way that I could never know in mine.
Great, thank you so much, Gemini Brett. Will you take a few questions?
Would love to.
All right, any questions from our audience? Or comments? Okay, so no breakfast for me tomorrow, right?
Are you, where are you, Linda? Are
Australia, Australia.
And you're in Melbourne?
No, I'm between Sydney and Brisbane.
Oh, gotcha.
4,000 feet above sea level.
Wow.
Yeah, it's great. So no breakfast for me. It's happening for me at 8 a.m.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mean to spread like fear tactics.
No, it's not fearful. It's fine.
Yeah, the idea, or if you are like sipping tea or whatever, just to very consciously understand that like parts of the other realms can come through that, because what's happening is the realms, in my view, the realms of soul beyond the veil. So whether we would call that higher self, or you know, in your land and in my land here, the elders will teach us that it's accessing the spirit of our ancestors, whatever. There's this merging of stuff that we can bring into this realm that might be a little too complicated for the material being to handle if we're not ready for it. And it's just wise to kind of engage with the opportunity of the experience without taking it too far, I think. But I think the worst thing we could do with eclipses when we have the opportunity to see them is to hide from them. I really feel like that was folks telling us, trying to keep us from seeing this stuff.
Well, that's very interesting. So any more comments? Marty?
I'll say something.
Go ahead.
If I can find something to say. I am just always amazed at your teaching, Brett. I mean, your style just resonates with me, and I always learn something new, and it gets me going on a new path. So thanks again. I think I'm going to get down into another rabbit hole probably, but
enjoy, right? Our quest is so endless. It's okay, next. Right?
Exactly. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes. Next comment.
Say this for folks who are in the States with Organization for Professional Astrology in October 8th through the 11th, I'll be doing a 3-day intensive in Tucson under dark skies. It's an amazing boutique hotel where we will be learning in the classroom, like intensely. I'm making all these animations to transmit the astronomical happenings in a way that we can practically receive them. And then there's embodiment exercises, and we'll be building sundials and medicine wheels to see how this thing works. And then at night, we'll see every visible planet. And so it's going to be an intensive time in the classroom. If you're interested in the OPA certification, this applies towards what now they have made part of their criterion is astronomy for astrologers, which I'm of course very happy about. And I'm very honored to be the first teacher for them for this 3-day intensive. So you could go to OPA Astrology or just search Organization for Professional Astrology online to find out more about this, which is part of their iAstrologer event. And then I've also got my Sacred Astronomy for Astrologers web course is in the process. Kind of gotten slowed down with this move that's happening. But the first 12 lessons are up and they're free on my website. So just go to morethan.astrology.com and you'll find Sacred Astronomy web course as a link. And if you go there, you'll find you can't access the second video until you have the password, which is the answer to the first video's test question. So it plays like an online mystery school created by a kid who played too many video games. And I hope it's fun, and I hope you'll go check it out. The whole point of the thing is to bring renature our astrology, reconnect the chart so we can see these things like proximity and latitude and stuff just by looking at a chart.
Okay.
So Linda, I see one question here was from Lauren, and it's kind of a question comment, but what does Mercury the Messenger like us to see? And I would just love to add this thing that, you know, when planets are retrograde, obviously this is an optical illusion, we know this, but you know, what we experience is they stop. Like Mercury is stopped right now. Mars is slow backwards. I mean, it's his fastest backwards right now, but he moves slowly because he's forward for 22 months about and backwards for 2 months. He doesn't have long to accelerate in reverse. We only have one gear in reverse, you know. Who doesn't like slow? Mercury and Mars, right? And so they're also slowing this thing down. And the answer for us, of course, is to act in kind. We really want these changes. We see these opportunities, these portals, and they are here for our shift. But sometimes that happens when we really make the dive, and sometimes it happens when we go for like the slow burn, you know. And I think a lot of that is alive in this eclipse cycle. I think this is a time very available for us to plant these seeds and these intentions of the way that we're going to shift, and that over the course of the next 6 months, maybe even year, 18 years, 54 years, we will find these dynamic changes for us and in our world if we choose to make it happen and to bring our will to the thing. All right, folks. So thank you so much for having a long journey with me today at the end of a long day. And thank you so much, Linda and Wanda and Olive and all you amazing beings that keep this EA Zoom meeting gift to the astrological community happening. It is a true honor to have the opportunity to participate. Thank you.
Excellent. So now we have a few comments from our audience. Go ahead, Marty.
Oh, I just wanted to say thank you. That was tremendous. I'm speechless for a change, and I just didn't want it to end. Thank you, Brett.
Thank you.
Excellent. So would you all please thank Gemini Brett, everyone. See you next time. Bye.
Gemini, thank you, Linda.
Thank you.
Bye, all.
Thank you. That was good.
Thank you, sir.
Awesome.
Enjoy the eclipse. Enjoy the eclipse, y'all. Light from shadow.
Okay.